You were alive. Fantastic. Okay. Well, hey, welcome to the Winsight Leadership Show. We are here today with Chris Cirullo. I appreciate you being on with me today. The whole idea that we're going to do in this conversation, if there's anybody that's live joining us or recorded after the fact, is to have a discussion about leadership, about faith, about finance, and how all these things meld together, and do it within larger families. And you'll see that both Chris and I have larger families. One of the things I want to introduce Chris, and then I'll see if he has anything that he wants to add to it. But he, 4 years ago, he founded a business called Mission Fit Dads. And if it looks like I'm reading, I totally am, because I don't want to get things wrong. With the purpose of helping Christian CEOs, entrepreneurs, and leaders transform their health and fitness by focusing on lifelong habit change and physical transformation. For those of you that this might be your first time here, at Winsight Leadership, one of the big things that we look at is that leadership is a whole life endeavor. And rather than just focusing on business, we see self-leadership, business leadership, and family leadership as three parts of the same thing. So super excited for this conversation today. Chris, man, welcome to it. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited. And this is absolutely up my alley in terms of the way I think about things too. So I hope it's a valuable conversation.
Well, I know it will be, and we've had a handful of discussions prior to this thing right now, and really the thing that led to this right now is the fact that there is such overlap, and it's just fun. We're just going to talk, and people are just going to listen to a conversation about it all. So
yeah, it's great.
You started Mission Fit Dads. I did a little bit of like the research on the background. You had spent time in the armed forces. It was the Army, if I believe, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And well, thanks for your service. And
Yeah.
you got out in 2013, and it looked like since then, fitness has just been like a common thread, like a theme that's kind of like gone through it all. And shine some light on that. Like, was there a story? Did something happen like in the Army that you're like, dude, fitness has got to be the thing? Or like what led to you kind of taking that path of fitness and just running with it?
Yeah, great question. So it actually started for me as a little kid. My dad was a endocrinologist, practicing for 36 years or something like that before retiring, and my mom was a physical therapist. So when I went to college, I was a human physiology major, and I just love the human body. I was always fascinated by how God had designed the intricacies, how things always function together. There were so many things that I kept discovering about the way the body works that were really fascinating to me. And so when I got out of the military, it was like, well, what am I good at? I've been an athlete my whole life, and I know the human body really well. Maybe I'll be a personal trainer, right? I really was at this crossroads of, I actually don't know what to do with my life. And now I have all these options. Yeah.
It's like, what do we want to be when you grow up? Kind of thing. Like,
Yeah.
there's so many options, but then it starts to become real, and you start putting some kind of chips in the game to start saying, this is the direction we're going. And 4 years ago, you're like, hey, I'm doing this thing now. Mission Fit Dads. I'm interested because I love words, and I believe that words are chosen intentionally. What does it mean, if you're talking to the dad, the CEO, the entrepreneur, like what does it mean to be mission fit by your standards?
Yeah. So I believe that every family has a unique space carved out in the world where they're intended to have impact. And so I would call that your mission or your calling or your assignment or whatever label you might give that. And there is this element of fitness. If fitness really is, I mean, when you look at this, the scientific definition, it's an organism's ability to survive and reproduce in a particular environment. And so I think about, okay, each family has this unique space that they're designed to operate a positive impact there to have on the world, and they need to be able to survive and reproduce that. There should be this multi-generational thinking about our legacy, the impact, and some of the most impactful people in the world come from families that had this big vision for how their family would serve, and they were able to instill that, and it passed through the generations. So to be a mission fit dad is to first and foremost identify what's that unique space that's carved out for my family. And then ultimately, what do I need to do to be holistically healthy, fit, and able to sustain and reproduce that kind of impact for more than one generation?
Hmm. Talk to me about this too, because you're talking about survival, but more than survival, that impact, which leads to intentionality. Like this impact is not just going to happen, or at least the intentional, positive, healthy impact that you're talking about. I know you and I both, between us, we've got 9 children. You've got 5 boys, I've got 4 boys, and I know that in our previous conversations, this idea of I guess I might even use the word legacy, but this impact, this healthy generational piece is not just going to accidentally happen to our boys. It's not just going to accidentally happen to our families. So, talk to me more about when you're walking with people, or when you're defining and casting this vision for them, about what does healthy generational impact look like, if you're trying to cast the vision of this is what we're told, or this is what you've probably seen, and this is what it could be.
Yeah, no, that's a really important point. So it's funny, I was having this conversation actually last night with a group of guys here at my house, and we were talking about legacy in the sense of one of the best, and this seems really juvenile and basic, but it's to me one of the best ways to filter out how I should be thinking about some of these things in regards to like legacy and multi-generational thinking. And that is this idea of, like, you hear people say what they left behind.
Hmm.
And I think oftentimes we pursue um, maybe saying the right things or trying to lead our kids or our family or our employees into the right things, but maybe not actually acting those things out ourselves very well. And when you're dead and you can no longer say things, what is remaining from what happened in your life?
Hmm.
What did people see you do? More is caught than taught. So what are they picking up from you? What did they see you put into practice? Um, as a father, are you leaving a legacy of maybe faith or health, and how you approach the human body, or finances or assets, or I mean, you name it. There's all sorts of things that get left behind, whether they are tangible or intangible. And so as we think about our impact on the world, we have to ask ourselves that question regularly. If I do X for this many years, what's going to be left behind when I'm gone?
Hmm.
And that tends to be, in my opinion, a really good filter for how should I spend my time? What kind of habits should I develop? What kind of things should I do in the community? How should my business operate? Like, what kind of taste do I want people to have left in their mouth when they interact with us? Those kinds of
Hmm.
things.
It's starting with the end in mind, it sounds like.
Yes, yes, very much.
It's interesting, and I can only imagine, and we've not talked about this before, but I can imagine in our separate conversations, working with, people that operate businesses or lead teams or have families that are under their guidance. That I know for certain that I've heard far too many conversations, and I call it the old guy or the old gal, and those conversations of regret. That I'm 75, I'm 80 years old, and when you look at them, there's a there's some type of a story when you dig in. They're like, I should have done this. Winsight was born out of years of leadership coaching and talking with people only in the private conversations on the side, and saying, like, I've got a really successful business, but like I'm filing for divorce, or like I don't know my kids and I did this for them. And you can just, it's a pain that I would never want on anybody. And I'm like, this has got to stop. Like, we can't do this. So when you meet with people, and this isn't on notes, this is just kind of like riffing, like, where are you meeting people generally when they come and talk to you? Like, you're obviously, like, there's a fitness, you can see it all set up behind you. Like, you're helping them fit, but I have a good intention that fitness for you means more than just physical fitness, as by your define. Like, again, I love words.
Yeah.
How would you define fitness if you're walking with people about, like, hey, this is what we're about to do?
Yeah, I think one of the misconceptions that people often have, or that even the fitness or health industry perpetuates is the ability to compartmentalize. Um, but nothing is mutually exclusive. Like my mental health or spiritual health, they impact how healthy my body is. My relational health with my family is going to impact the way that I approach my work. Everything interacts with one another. And so to be fit or to be healthy, it has to include addressing all the elements. And those are almost always interchangeable or directly connected to this legacy conversation as well. So you think about uh, a complete legacy being left behind would be one that includes, you know, assets and finances and spiritual health and physical health and relational health and communal health and like all there are these things that I have shaped in my family multi-generationally in ways that they're also impacting the community. Health looks like also addressing all of those in your health journey. So guys that I work with, they often will be addressing a unique set of habits that are actually quite small when you think about what people normally prescribe.
Mm.
We want to reduce it down so we can do it consistently over time. But I would suggest people are addressing daily routines and habits around their actual nutrition, their fitness, interaction with their wives, the way that they are present with their children, how they think about revenue or growth in their business. All of those are aspects that need to be addressed when we are thinking about health holistically. Yeah, does that answer the question?
It does. It does. If I'm hearing you right, and the reason that I pushed in on it is because, again, like I think there's something about when you talk about fitness, people probably are thinking, well, I'm just going to like, get strong. I'm going to get my body in shape and I'm going to take care of myself physically. Where, as a father, one of the first things that can go if I'm not intentional with time is going to be my self-care. And I know we were talking before here that there's that idea of like that self-care is not selfish. And
Yeah.
that's a whole thing that sometimes keep people tripped up. But the reason I wanted to push in was that I have the suspicion, and you just confirmed that fitness is not just physical. Like there's got to be other aspects of your life that you're taking into account, and that uh, you don't just accidentally become healthy. You don't just accidentally wake up and have the faith foundation that you want, or have like the family relationships. You don't wake up and accidentally get just jacked. I'm watching the Olympics. None of that's accidentally happening. So, but you talked about habits, and I'm glad you did, because one of the hallmarks that it sounds like you focus on is this idea of, hey, habit formation, habit change, habit intentionality is the way to get from here to that idealized future place that you want to be in.
Yeah.
There's so many other things that from a fitness and intentionality perspective that you probably could have focused in on, but you chose habit formation. And I love it, but why? Like what about
Yeah.
habit formation kind of captured you and keeps you coming back?
Yeah. Yeah. So the human brain is designed to save energy. It requires a tremendous amount of caloric sustenance to drive all the things in the body. Everything from your heart beating properly to your involuntary breath of like getting oxygen into your lungs. There's so much that the brain needs to do, and so it purposefully turns things into automation.
Hmm.
I believe God hardwired our brain this way intentionally. And the problem then becomes that most of what we do throughout each day is actually automatic. And there are these neurological pathways where one thing happens, and then in response, I do this thing. And most of those we are totally unconscious of. We have no idea that those are happening. But if we kind of evaluate any given day, there's so many things. The way that I brush my teeth and how I put the toothpaste, I mean, everything is automatic.
Hmm.
And if you want to shift health, if you want to shift self-leadership, if you want to shift the way that you approach life to have a holistically healthy way of living, it requires understanding what those existing automations are and then replacing them with better ones. But the interesting thing about habits is there's some research that shows that they don't go away. So when you have a habit, what's really happening is you have a cue, something that triggers a craving, sometimes subconsciously, sometimes consciously. And what you're craving is a particular reward. And in order to get to the reward, you have a response. So let's just think about smoking cigarettes, for example, right? I'm going to have a cue. I'm going to smell it or see someone with it. Or maybe there's a particular time in the day where every time I reach this point, like a lunch break or whatever, I finished a meal, I would have a cigarette. So I've got this cue, this environmental trigger, and that's immediately going to create a craving for me to get to a reward. And that reward is this temporary relief that nicotine creates for me.
Mm.
So that has now been set in this loop. And so there was an example of a lady who she used to ride horses. And every time she would ride horses, she would light up and she would smoke while she's riding horses. And one day she really wanted to quit smoking cigarettes. She eventually worked herself to the point where she was able to quit smoking. But what she didn't realize is that simultaneously took place with her also stopping riding horses.
Mm.
So she has zero cravings. Nothing happens for multiple decades. And then she starts picking up in her older age this habit of riding horses again. And the moment she starts riding horses, she has this craving for cigarettes that she hasn't had in decades. And so habits become like a path that gets grown over with brush. Like you can't really see the path, but it's there. It's been trodden enough times that it's still going to be easy to find a couple decades later. So what you have to do is create a different path that becomes more prominent. So it'd be like the equivalent of I'm now seeing this paved major highway that is the direction my car is supposed to go on. And when I pass by that turn that I used to drive on, it's all overgrown. It doesn't even look like I can maybe even make it through there anymore. That becomes a deterrent from taking that turn because I've got such a prominent highway over here. So when it comes to habits for people, what we have to first identify is which ones do I have? Which ones do I want to override or replace or cause to become dormant? And then how do I set up the systems in order to create the new habits? And that's oftentimes relatively challenging to figure out.
Mm. I know the book that comes to mind, James Clear's Atomic Habits book, comes to mind for a lot of
Yeah.
the principles that you're
Yes.
talking about. That it's that saying of just because it's simple doesn't mean that it's easy.
Hmm.
That the steps that you need to take are like, well, hey, do this, readjust this, change this kind of a thing. And yet there's the even to the overgrown idea, like it's not going away. Like there's still going to be
Yeah.
that temptation, and you've got to be, stronger. Or I would say with a lot of my clients that like pre-choose your yeses
Mm.
because like it's going to come up again.
Yep.
I'm interested again talking about mission fit dads, talking about being mission fit and ready. There are habits that you probably see time and time again that are showing up, and there are things that you probably have to walk through with people and address and help break and shine a light on so that they can be able to move in freedom and new life in a different way. If somebody's listening here, and if somebody was here, I wouldn't say like, hey, raise your hand, here's the bad habits that you see. But like, let's say somebody's listening and they're like, hey, you know what, um, there is kind of like wholeness of life that I feel like doesn't exist at parts of who I am, from whether it's the faith side, the fitness side, the family side. um, what would you say is like a first step for them to take that step towards wholeness when it comes to some of this habit formation and change?
The biggest challenge people run into is they make too big of an attempt. So, okay, I've been unhealthy for years. My solution to that is I'm going to start working out for an hour a day and I'm going to start eating only salads and like, these huge sweeping changes. And inevitably, those are so big and they require so much willpower that it actually short circuits our ability to create a habit most of the
Mm.
time. So that's why 90% of people who lose weight on a weight loss plan gain all of it back plus some in the first year after they finish that plan, is because most of it was willpower based. And this is one of my biggest frustrations with the fitness industry is these sweeping changes to people's lives. It's like we can't suddenly just remove a certain way somebody lives and tack on a new one. Like this has to be a process that's done periodically and slowly. So to answer your question, my biggest recommendation for people is to start with the smallest, the most minimum viable approach to a new habit. So sometimes for clients that haven't exercised in decades, it's like, hey, we're going to start with 20 push-ups a day. And we're going to create a habit around something that is so easy that you could do it for the rest of your life, whether you're sick or traveling, your family's visiting, or your entire day gets thrown upside down, because it takes 60 seconds. You can do it on the floor in the airport. You can do it in the bathroom. You can do it, by your bed at night. Like, it doesn't matter. So how do we lower the bar of entry and develop this baseline set of healthy habits? And usually for clients, I've got a set of 5 to 10 that they're doing each day that are tiny, tiny, tiny like this, and then we get to build on them. And that, to me, if you can create a habit around the mechanism of an action, then you can expand the action. So I'm a Christian, and one of the ways to think about this is people want to develop a Bible reading plan. And they're like, well, I'm going to sit down for 30 or 60 minutes a day and I'm going to read the Bible. And it's like the first week where you have this crazy week and you don't have that amount of time, the whole thing goes out the window, versus saying, what's the minimum viable amount that I can do that's going to help me, plant seeds and grow spiritually and have a foundation of spiritual health that I could do every single day of the year, no matter what. And so then how do we identify that thing, put it in place, and develop that habit so that the mechanism is there and you can expand from that as that becomes ingrained habit. But you can't start big. You can't make these sweeping changes that require willpower, because again, the brain wants easy. It wants automatic. So it's going to default back to the things that are already automatic for it if you give it a chance to.
Let's say, and let's set the bar for the people that are watching this or that will watch this so low that they can't help but trip on it because it's so low. And what I want to do is kind of put you in the hot seat. Well, you're already in the hot seat, but like put you in the hot seat from we're talking faith, we're talking family, we're talking fitness. The fitness thing, 20 push-ups a day, something, make it so low that you can't not do it. What's a super practical example? Because my heart and your heart, I know we've had conversations about it, is I'm a Christian guy. Winsight is based on biblical principles. Winsight actually comes from Proverbs 4:7, get wisdom, get insights, but from a faith and from a family perspective, what is the low bar you can't help but trip over because it's so low that you're going to do it? From a faith and a family perspective, like I want to be better at being more faith conscious and really step into that and be more consistent than I have been. And from a dad perspective, let's say somebody's listening, I want to be a better dad. What would one example be that you would give somebody that says hey, don't overthink it, do this?
So I would two-part. I'll go back to the reference about scripture here in just a minute, but from a fatherhood standpoint and a faith standpoint, what I would recommend every dad develop is actually a nighttime liturgy with their kids. So I actually learned this through Justin Whitmore Early. He's an author. He wrote a book called Habits of the Household. And inside of that, he kind of unpacks how he does this as well. But I have my own version of this. And every single night when I put my kids to bed, I just have this thing that I wrote down and I taught them. And now we repeat it back to each other and it takes like 30 seconds. So I'll share it right now. So I say, I will say to them, why do I love you? And they say, because I'm your son. And I say, you have what it takes, don't you? And they say, I have what it takes and I will face my fears. And I say, how do you please me? And they say, by obeying, playing, fighting, and honoring. And I say, obeying? And they say, obeying right away with a happy heart. Fighting? Fighting for good things. Playing? Wanting to learn and play, especially with dad. And honoring our father and mother. And then I just look at them and I say, may the peace of God and the love of Christ be on you guys tonight as you sleep. And it takes 30 seconds. And right now I am reminding myself of these truths because I'm a son of the Father as well. and that he is pleased with me when I spend time with him and I obey him and I fight for good things and I honor. Um, and I have what it takes because he's with me and I can face fears. And ultimately, he loves me because I'm his son, not because of anything that I can do. So
Mm.
I'm reminding myself of these truths while I'm ingraining these truths in my kids and shaping them. And it takes 30 seconds. And it's like the things that they will remember in 20 years will probably be those tiny little things. And it's also going through repetition, totally shape their worldview and how they approach life. So that's a really low bar. And you can write it out and you can read it. I read it to them and I like taught them. It took weeks and weeks. And it's like, it doesn't have to be this like beautifully profound thing. Um, and then I would say on the faith side, I used to use the Bible app to give me the verse of the day as my kind of minimum viable amount. And that could be a good place for people to start just to get the mechanism and the habit. The thing that I realized is that that verse was always delivered out of context, and I didn't really know what was happening in the passage, and it was hard to really like say, what does this mean for me? And so I decided that a section out of the Gospels of anywhere from 5 to 10 verses from header to header inside of one of the Gospel stories was a great place to start because it took me 2 minutes to read, 5 or 10 verses. And I could think about like a 2 sentence takeaway of like, I wonder why that happened. Or, oh, that's an interesting insight. I want to tell that to my kids at dinner tonight or whatever. And the bar was really low. It took me a couple minutes and I could do it any day of the week, anywhere in the world, especially because we have these smartphone things that I have access to anything I want, anywhere I go.
Mm. What I'm hearing too, in between like kind of the lines of what you're saying too, is that you made an intentional effort and intentional choice for a lot of the habits that you've developed and you've held on to based off of back to that whole, where do I want to be? We use the word regrets. That's the negative side, but the positive side is that like it could be that whole life. You made the intention that says, hey, these are the areas that I want to focus on. That it was that like where people would start if they're looking at this and saying like, hey, where do I want to make sure that I just don't drift towards, but I want to actually move in this direction? Is it as, I don't want to say simple because again, simple and easy are two different things, but is it a, hey, you know what, like start by thinking about who I want to be? Like, is there an exercise there that you could practically do if you're listening to this?
Yes. Yeah. I can't remember if I just posted about this today or when this was, but I like to call it the Google Maps exercise.
Hmm.
So um, the starting point for anyone is being absolutely brutally honest with what the current scenario is. Am I unhealthy in this area? Am I leading well in this area? Can my team trust me? Does my wife, let me lead? Or husband, do we have a healthy relationship? Whatever that looks like. What's the honest truth about where we are today? And then we want to get crystal clear on where we want to go. And that, for me, the mission fit dads thing is start to uh, prayerfully daydream and vision cast and understand. Okay, what is that kind of future end goal? Because if you think about the way Google Maps functions, if you don't have an exact pinpoint starting point and you don't have an exact destination outlined in Google Maps, it can't build you the path. It can't create the turn by turn directions if either of those things is missing or incorrect or vague. If you don't have good enough service, we've all had this problem.
I just
Like
want to go
our
to the beach. Like, all
yeah,
right, that's great.
our phone's trying to figure out where we are, and there's this giant circumference, and it's like in here somewhere, and it's trying
Uh-huh.
to find the location, and it's like that's not. It can't build a plan off of that. So step one is the Google Maps kind of thing: is where are we? Where do we want to be? And then a really like authentic and vulnerable look at what is the gap and what would need to change in order for that gap to be bridged. And then you can build your approach off of those things.
Mm.
So a practical example to the point that you mentioned earlier of someone that's like, well, my business is doing really great, but I went through a divorce. Well, maybe I'm somebody that wants a successful business and doesn't want to go through a divorce. And I'm in the early stages of feeling some tensions in my marriage and some things that are problematic as I'm been building this business. So I need to begin by asking myself, okay, what's broken right now? And then where do I want to end up? And what are the small things that I can do each day or each week that help improve the health of my marriage and ensure that it lasts? And build that into your weekly rhythm. And that could be as small as every Wednesday, I'm going to write a love note on a sticky for my wife and put it on her coffee mug by the coffee maker before I leave. And it just literally says, I love you, or like, I'm grateful for you, or whatever. And so that's my recommendation. You have to have the starting point, you have to have the destination, then you can build the pathway, and don't think too big about how, wide sweeping changes.
Hmm. The thing that I love about just the idea and the conversation around fitness is specifically in physical fitness, but in the other areas that you've just mentioned as well, is that fitness classically is signing up for you to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like discomfort is kind of like the table stakes of we're gonna jump in here and entering into it's gonna be uncomfortable, but we know this intellectually, but it's always harder fought that growth is always on the other side of the intentional discomfort that you step into. To be able to say, hey, this is not where my marriage is that I want it to be. My relationship or my intentionality with my kids is not where I want it to be. Here's the reality of my faith journey right now, but here's what it could be. And that gap, man, usually that gap is not a fun way to get across. And I mean, I use the word bravery. It takes bravery to take and start the journey, I would imagine. So, well, I wouldn't say I would imagine. I'm daily on it.
Yeah.
Like my personal mission is with 4 little boys, being the first husband and wife, Christian couple in our family's line,
Mm.
to have 4 young men that love Jesus. That
Yeah.
it's the reason we're doing this, and that you got to start somewhere. So, well, this has been great.
Can I add one thing to
Please go
that?
ahead. Please go ahead.
So I can't remember if we talked about this in the past, but one of the concepts that I was taught during my venture back kind of like software startup days was this concept called the Stockdale Paradox.
Hmm.
And it's this idea of when something goes wrong in a business, what we need to do is we need to confront the brutal facts, but we need to maintain relentless optimism. And so it's a blame-free environment where we just say, okay, what's the truth about what happened? Something fell apart. We're not saying it fell apart in John's jurisdiction and so everything's on John. It's just saying this happened. What's the reality and what are the repercussions of this? But what hope do we have? Why can we remain relentless about our optimism? And it's in addressing things at the reality of where they are without losing that emphasis on life of like excitement and optimism and hope. That's where you can really make some progress here. And so um, as you're talking about discomfort in this kind of in between stage, that's my recommendation is that people intentionally write out what they have to be optimistic about or hopeful about, because it's really easy to pick apart what's broken. It's a lot harder but more helpful and more impactful if we can take a few minutes to say, what's good? What am I optimistic about? What do I have in my tool belts that can help me do this? And what have I done successfully in the past? So that I can remind myself that this is possible, and that, because we have amnesia. Humans have amnesia. And so all of us have experienced bridging these gaps before. We've just forgotten what it's like because it might have been a long time since the last time we did it. And so we have to take time and reflect back on, okay, I have what it takes. I can be optimistic and hopeful. Let's be realistic about this, but I've done this before and I can do it. So I'm going to step in and I'm going to be intentional right now.
Mm. And I imagine too, having somebody walking with you, having that community or people around you that sit there and say like, hey, you're not horrible. You're not a failure. Like you're not like this is something you're going to make it through this too. The importance of having somebody to walk with you.
Yes.
So this has been great. I've so appreciated the conversation. If people want to find more information about you, or how would they follow up with you, and how would they find more about Mission Fit Dads?
Yeah, so you can find information about kind of what I do with men at missionfit.co, missionfit.co, or people can just email me or hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm fine with any and all of the above. My email is Chris at my old domain, which is missionfitdads.com. So yeah, I'd love to chat, and I love just meeting people. So I oftentimes just hop on Zoom to make social media more social with random people that I meet. So if anyone's got questions or they just want to pick my brain, I'm happy to do that.
That's how we got connected. It was just like,
Yep.
hey, you want to talk? You're like, sure, let's go. Um, two more things. One, what is what's something that's coming up with Mission Fit Dads that it, people, if they want to engage more with like what you're doing or this message is resonating with them, that they can take an active part in, or that they can, learn more about? What's something that you're doing?
Yeah, so I spent the last 4 years kind of iterating, and there's a ton of learning. So I've taken what used to be my methodology and philosophy delivered in a couple of different ways, and now changed that into an entirely new kind of program design or pathway for addressing all of these things that we've been talking about. And that's been in, quote unquote testing mode, specifically from like the delivery mechanism standpoint. Again, the philosophies and methodologies are all long standing. But about 3 or 4 months into testing that with a pretty large group of guys, and that's been incredible. So I'm getting ready for that to be more public. So if that's something that people are interested in, even just learning details about, I'd love to chat about that too.
That's awesome. Last but not least, what is and you can take this wherever you want to go with it, but just a piece of wisdom or a leadership thought that you have for people to kind of send them off with?
The leadership thought.
Leadership thought, something to encourage them.
Yeah, I would say it's never too far gone.
Hmm.
As a believer, I think about Joel 2 in the scriptures, and in that, you've got this disobedient nation of Israel that has caused all sorts of challenges. And there's this little piece in there because Joel 2 is kind of talking about the coming kind of restoration and redemption of things. And it says that God says, I will restore the years that the locusts have eaten. And I go back to that a lot because oftentimes most of us, we feel overwhelmed. We feel like it's been too many decades. I'm too ingrained in this, or I've already ruined my marriage. We're not divorced yet, but it's headed that way and it's probably inevitable. Or my kids are 17 and they're about to leave the house, so it's too late to start engaging in these things now, or whatever. But I serve uh, the creator of the universe who lives outside of time, space, and matter, and he can redeem time because
Mhm.
he created it. He operates outside of it. He can redeem time. There's nothing beyond his ability to restore and redeem. And so, whether someone is a Christian or believes the same things that I believe, the reality still is that we can all look around us and see examples of people that we counted out or circumstances that we wrote off that actually got right-sided, right-sized, and ended up going great, And so let that be a hope to us that it's never too far gone. We can start today and we can still have an impact. And if you're a believer, then remind yourself that you have a God that lives outside of time, and he can make up for everything he can do more in 24 hours than you could do in a lifetime. And
Mhm.
so we can rest in that.
Well, that encourages me. Whatever anybody else, if anybody else is encouraged, that's fantastic. But that encourages me, and well, I appreciate your time. For anybody that that will listen or has listened to this, thank you so much for following up on this. Again, we care so much about leadership development because you, as a leader, what you do matters. You taking care of yourself, you leading your family, you leading your business. You are one person, and you should be taking care of all of it. And Chris and I are here to help. So thanks for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you next time. All right, it's spinning.